You haven't noticed lately, the Earth is experiencing a great deal of unrest. A major uptick in seismic and volcanic activity is happening right now. Our Sun is also acting up in unusual ways. A massive coronal hole has recently opened up, spewing a stream of high-speed solar wind directly towards Earth, which should also be disconcerting to anyone who is paying attention to what's happening here on planet Earth. So why should we be concerned about all of these recent events that are taking place at this particular time? To understand what's happening, let's journey back a few weeks to discover some very significant changes that are happening that the media doesn't want you to know about, and for good reason. They don't want the public becoming alarmed by what is developing with our climate, to the changes in our atmosphere, and also to the changes below the surface of the Earth. Now, here are some important facts that each of us should know and be aware of. On September 20th, the NOAA released its monthly Global Planet Report. In that report, they state that August was the 16th month in a row of record warmth for the globe, the longest such streak in 137 years. If this trend continues, then Northern Europe will be celebrating their Christmas on the beach. But if that wasn't bad enough, August was a whopping 1.66 degrees above the 20th century average, breaking the 2015 record for the warmest August on record by 0.09 degrees. For the year to date, the average global temperature was 1.81 degrees above average, breaking the heat record set in 2015 by 0.29 degrees. Now, this may not sound like much of an increase, but this is a worrisome trend as the goalpost gets moved just a little further each month. As you can see in this illustration, August was also a record-breaking month for extreme climate-related events across the planet. Take a look at these notable findings from around the world, according to NOAA reports. As you can see, they portray a familiar trend that is developing across continents, both land and sea surfaces. Temperatures are rising at a steady pace, and with this rise comes a steady decline in sea ice in the polar regions, which will only contribute to the extreme climate conditions that are already inflicting the planet. The summer of 2016 has seen record temperatures broken in Greenland. According to the Danish Meteorological Institute, parts of Greenland's vast ice sheet began melting unusually early. The average summer temperature was 8.2 degrees Celsius, which is 46.76 degrees Fahrenheit, in Tasseleg on Greenland's southeast coast. Now, that's the highest since records began in 1895. And it's 2.3 degrees Celsius, or 36.14 degrees Fahrenheit, above the average between 1981 and 2010. New highs were also recorded in the south and in the northeast this summer, after a balmy spring that broke records of 6 out of 14 weather stations in the territory. In April of this year, DMI said that the seasonal melting of Greenland's vast ice sheet had reached record levels, which prompted it to check to see if its models were still working properly. Around 12% of the ice sheet was found to be melting almost 1 month earlier than the previous top 3 dates for when more than 10% of the ice had begun to melt. The Greenland ice sheet, a potentially massive contributor to rising sea levels, lost mass twice as fast between 2003 and 2010 as during the entire 20th century. In addition to global temperature rise and climate extremes, the Earth has been experiencing a major uptick in seismic activity. 4 major quakes have been recorded within just a 3-day span, which brings the number of major earthquakes for the month of September to 13. The total for 2016 now stands at 105. September has now seen 8 major quakes in a span of 9 days. We can expect more major quakes in the coming week as a large coronal hole on the Sun turns to face the Earth. Coronal holes are thought by many experts to influence seismic activity here on Earth. So what is causing the sudden solar activity? After all, the Sun has been relatively quiet for some time. Do the sudden changes on the surface of our Sun pose any threat or impending danger to our planet? Let's listen to Dr. Keku, an American theoretical physicist, futurist, and popularizer of science, who is the science professor at the City College of New York, as he attempts to alert the public to the dangers of a major solar eruption and how it could potentially affect life on Earth. If you listen very carefully, you will notice that Dr. Keku is providing an in-depth analysis of the dangers that await us due to the strange behavior of the Sun, which he states is acting rather peculiar.
What is new with Professor Kaku these days?
Well, this past weekend, something happened which really disturbed me, and that is the Sun is having this temper tantrum, and it's getting worse and worse.
Oh, boy.
We had 5 solar flares erupt last week, 2 just in the past weekend. NASA satellites were just overwhelmed by the size of the flare that came out of the Sun. Two flares came out of the Sun on Friday and Saturday, and we're headed toward the 11-year sunspot cycle maximum now. And the fear is that one of these solar flares could hit the Earth, in which case all hell could break loose. And,
it's just a matter of time, isn't it?
It's a matter of time. We've had a big one about 150 years ago in 1859. We had a huge solar flare that hit the Earth. Back then we only had telegraph wires, but even they were shorted out. And you could read the newspaper in Cuba at night by the light of the northern lights, the aurora borealis, as far south as Cuba. And from that, we physicists can recalculate how big that solar flare of 1859 must have been. If we were hit with another one like that, it would fry our satellites, communications would go down instantly, power plants would be shorted out, and in a worst case, remember, this is a worst case scenario now.
That's right.
We physicists believe that it could be 20 times worse than Hurricane Katrina.
Oh, my God.
So imagine 20 Hurricane Katrinas ravaging the Earth simultaneously. And you can begin to estimate the kind of damage you can get if there's a direct hit from one of these solar flares. And, we're headed toward the maximum. More and more flares are going off the Sun. We had another big one last month, by the way. So far, we've dodged a bullet. So far, we've been able to miss the solar flares. But these solar flares are like bullets. Sunspots are like rifles. Think of rifles shooting bullets into outer space and missing the Earth, because, of course, outer space is quite big. But one of these days, one of these solar flares is going to hit the Earth, like what happened in 1859, and then all hell could break loose.
Yeah, if it's the right size and it hits us on a direct angle, or we are in trouble, and we haven't insulated the grid. Everything could go down. I'll tell you what concerns me too much, is what happens if the power goes out? What about all our nuke plants? And we won't have the ability to, they will melt down, won't they?
Yeah, take a look at what happened in Japan. The backup power generators were in the basement. You can't think of anything worse, any worse place to put a generator than in the basement of a building. It was flooded almost immediately by the tsunami. And so the reactor almost instantly was dead in the water. They had no power. And because they had no power, there was no safety systems. And then we had 3 simultaneous core meltdowns in Fukushima, plus the uranium actually liquefied. We've never seen a totally liquefied core before. First time in history. but the Fukushima reactor actually melted totally. And so we could have lots of these around the country if there's a power blackout because of a solar flare. Simultaneously, we lose pump activity, we lose backup power, we lose the ability to control the control rods. It would be a nightmare.
And how long?
Well, it only takes a few hours for a core meltdown to get off the ground. Yeah. And by the way, at Fukushima, you may ask yourself a simple question. If the core melted completely, then how come we didn't have a China syndrome? How come there wasn't an explosion that blew the roof off like Chernobyl? And the reason is that in Fukushima, one of the workers disobeyed orders. He was under a direct order not to flush the core with seawater, because that would destroy the core. The utility thought they could revive the reactor still. They had illusions about that. But he disobeyed orders. He made the only correct decision during the first few days. He flooded the reactor with seawater, and he stopped the devastation of northern Japan. He's a national hero.
Yes,
and he disobeyed orders.
He may have saved many, many lives.
Oh, definitely. And we could have something similar if we lose power in the United States or, around the planet Earth. If there's a gigantic solar storm, if there's a hurricane from hell from outer space. Now, we physicists went to Congress last year, and we asked Congress for a few $100 million, that's chump change, to reinforce our power plant, to build a backup grid, to make our satellites so that we could shut them down in case of a major flare, or maybe even have safety systems on the next generation of satellites. And we got nothing. Congress just laughed at us. But, we're the physicists of this country. We're the American Physical Society. We're the organization of physicists in this country. And we said to Congress that these are rare events, maybe once in 100 years, once in a 200-year event, but it's inevitable. It's inevitable that one of these bullets is going to hit the Earth like what happened 150 years ago. And when that happens, it's going to be worse than Katrina.
It's an insurance policy. Why would they not jump all over this?
Well, they said things like, times are hard and, the probability of an event is low. But, power blackouts have happened because of sunspot activity. In Quebec, Canada, for example, and in South Africa, certain cities were hit with solar flares, but they were not a direct hit. They were like a grazing blow to the Earth, and we've had power blackouts. Now, see, here's the problem. We're very young in the space age. We've only had experiences with these sunspot cycles for only a few cycles because, Sputnik only went up in 1957. We haven't had experience, but these solar flares have been going on for billions of years. But we never had electricity for billions of years. We've only had electricity for 100 years. And so we have no experience with one of these things. And so it's just like hurricanes. People think that, hurricanes are bad, but they're very rare, so why bother to prepare for them? Then one day it hits you, and then you lose $50 billion like in Hurricane Sandy.
Yeah, I think it's foolish that they're not doing this, Mathieu. They should have jumped all over your proposals, and that it should have been implemented right now. We should be building infrastructure right now, insulating the grid, protecting our power plants. It's going to bite us one day. I can feel it.
That's right. And, you can imagine the chaos. If all of a sudden we have power blackouts simultaneously across the country, no rescue crews are going to come in from neighboring cities because they, too, will be knocked out. So you're not going to see ambulances and fire trucks from neighboring cities to take care of us in case of a power blackout. And then food is going to rot in refrigerators, as what happened with Hurricane Sandy. It only takes a few days for food to rot. And new food is not going to come in from the outside because there is no outside. And so food riots are going to start in a few days because people realize that there's no food to eat because all the food is rotten because there's no electricity. And so you can imagine the kind of chaos you're going to have. Now, here in the Northeast, we had Hurricane Sandy, but, we got relief from the outside. The rest of the country was not paralyzed.
That's right.
The airports were up and running in a few days, and so shipments of food, trucks can come in. But can you imagine what happens if there's no outside, that if they, too, are hit simultaneously with one of these solar flares? And, like I said, we're headed for a solar maximum now. In just a few months, we'll hit the peak of this solar cycle. And so the temper tantrums that we had last week will be multiplied in the coming weeks. And there'll be more and more newspaper reports, especially from NASA, monitoring the sun, because we never used to do this before, by the way. We never used to monitor these things. Now we monitor them, because now we begin to realize, oh, my God, this could really be a big one.
Now it scares. I wonder what the Mayans really knew, Mitchu, when they talk about the Mayan calendar end date. I wonder if it was truly going to be some kind of solar event.
Well, I don't know. All I know is that the laws of physics tell us that this happens every 11 years. The reason for that, by the way, is that the North Pole and the South Pole of the sun flip every 11 years. Because the sun spins, it sort of like winds up its magnetic field lines, like winding the windings of a clock. If you wind the windings of a clock too much, it springs open. It pops out at you, right? That's what happens every 11 years. When the sun spins, it winds up its magnetic field lines, like winding up the windings of a clock. And after 11 years, it can't take it anymore and goes boing, 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 boing.
Boing, off it goes.
and goes north-south flips. And so we have a pole shift of the sun every 11 years. And this has been going on, of course, for billions of years. But we didn't have a space program back then. We didn't have power grids back then to worry about.
The consideration of a supersolar disruption creating havoc on our planet is a very real probability. As described by Dr. Keku, it happened to our planet in the past and is likely to happen once again. The Carrington event of 1859 was one of the largest geomagnetic storms to ever hit the Earth, and its impact was tremendous, knocking out telegraph communications across Europe and North America. In addition, auroras were observed as far south as the Caribbean and at latitudes very close to the equator. Here is a short video clip on what took place in 1859.
In 1755, man began to record the storm activity on the Sun. Solar cycle 10 lasted for 11.3 years, from December 1855 until March 1867. During this cycle, the solar storm of 1859, also known as the Carrington superstorm, was the most powerful sunstorm ever recorded. From the 28th of August, 1859, until the 2nd of September, numerous sunspots and solar flares were observed on the surface of the Sun. Just before noon on the 1st of September, the British astronomer Richard Carrington witnessed the largest solar flare ever recorded. The solar flare ejected a plasma cloud that traveled from the surface of the Sun for just over 18 hours before finally reaching the Earth. As the dawn broke on the 1st of September 1859, the skies all over planet Earth erupted in red, green, and purple lights so brilliant that newspapers could be read as if it were daylight. Stunning northern lights pulsated at the tropical latitudes over Cuba, the Bahamas, and Jamaica. Telegraph systems worldwide went haywire. Spark discharges shocked telegraph operators and set the telegraph paper on fire. Even when the telegraph operators disconnected the batteries powering the lines, electric currents in the wires still allowed messages to be transmitted. A sunstorm of this sort today could cause billions of dollars of damage to the Earth's satellites and terrestrial power grids, and disrupt radio and cell phone communications. In the 160-year recorded history of geomagnetic storms, the Carrington event is the biggest.
As this video implies, there is no doubt that our sun is a powerful force that can inflict great turmoil on our planet. But what if the dangers that our star can inflict are in some way influenced by an unknown force, one unfamiliar to the modern-day astronomers and scientists, but a force which the world has not prepared for? In essence, the effects of a celestial body, estimated to be 4 to 8 times the size of our Earth, entering our solar system. In 2015, the topic of Planet X created an off-the-chart internet frenzy, in large part because many people were convinced that this rogue planet would cause enormous amounts of space debris from the asteroid belt, namely large comets and meteors that would plummet violently to the Earth. Fears became so widespread, a rock may be about to strike, that NASA took the unusual move of issuing a statement ruling this out. And as we now know, we are all still here and the planet still exists. Is it possible that all of these prognostications of our demise were just a clever attempt to divert attention from what is really approaching from space? If people are led to believe that something terrible is going to happen, which then ultimately never materializes, then there will come a time when people will just stop believing altogether and will settle into their daily routine. And that is what I believe is happening with all of these false alarms. So what is the real possibility of a deep impact event brought on by a rogue planet in our solar system? Do you think that NASA or the government would warn us or keep us in the dark, much in the same way in which they are keeping us in the dark about the Nibiru system and its effects on our planet? Just recently, a very peculiar sunset occurred in Pacifica, California. The sun split into multiple layers and was followed by a green flash, the result of intense temperature inversions in the upper atmosphere. We sometimes refer to this as a mirage. So let's take a look. Just as some sunsets may deceive our eyes, there are things happening right now that are very real and which pose a danger to our survival. One of those dangers involves cosmic rays, which is in essence a form of space weather. Cosmic rays can seed clouds, trigger lightning, and most importantly can penetrate commercial airlines. Furthermore, these rays have been linked to cardiac arrest in the general population. So it appears they have the potential to kill. According to the latest measurements of these deadly rays, they are intensifying with an increase of more than 12% since 2015. X-ray and gamma ray infiltration is being recorded in an energy range that is comparable to a medical X-ray or an airport security scan. So why are these rays intensifying? One of the main reasons is that the Earth's magnetic field, which protects us from harmful rays, is weakening and beginning to break down, which allows these rays to penetrate the protective atmosphere of the planet. The collapse of our magnetic shield poses yet another problem for life on Earth, as space rocks are able to enter our upper atmosphere mostly intact, creating a potentially life-threatening consequence for the inhabitants of planet Earth. Every evening, a network of NASA all-sky cameras scans the skies above the United States for meteors and fireballs. Automated software maintained by NASA's Meteoroid Environment Office calculates their orbits, velocity, penetration, depth in Earth's atmosphere, and many other characteristics. The results of these scans indicate that a significant number of fireballs are penetrating the atmosphere. As of September 27th, there have been more than 37 fireball entries. The diagram showing here, taken of the inner solar system, is indicating that all of the fireball orbits are intersecting at a single spot, and that spot is planet Earth. So what is the point of all of these observations? The fact exists that something is causing the Earth to experience sudden and drastic changes in its climate, to its magnetic field, and thus to the surface of the Earth. Not only are we seeing major planetary changes brought on in part by erratic behavior on the surface of the Sun, but the dangers lie in wait from celestial objects that have been knocked off course in the asteroid belt by a mysterious cosmic force. So is it any wonder that being prepared is a choice that makes perfect sense in a world of turmoil and chaos? Do we not prepare for both success and failure simultaneously? Being alert to what's happening around us could save the life of your friends, and more importantly, your own existence. Bad things that are anticipated to occur needs to be prepared for perfectly, because they are inescapable, such as climate change, weather-related disasters, and cosmic forces which could disrupt our lifestyle. I personally know this all too well, and when and how you prepare can make all the difference in this world. So look around you. Take note of what is happening to the planet. Observe the changes in the seasons, how animals and birds are reacting to the changes that are occurring. The Inuit elders of the Arctic regions are keenly aware of what is happening to our planet. They have observed the movement of the sky, the planets which are out of alignment, the sun which rises and sets where it should not, a world which is wobbling like a drunken sailor. They know that this world is not right. Something has gone astray. It is those who know and understand what is happening to our Earth who can best provide the answers that each of us seek.